The boring history for sleep. The entire life of Mansa Musa, king of gold and gently long journeys. Hey guys, tonight we begin in the warm, shimmering gold of the West African dawn. You're standing barefoot on the edge of the Sahara just before sunrise. The sand beneath your feet is still cool from the night, but the air already carries hints of the heat to come. A breeze stirs the acacia trees, ruffles the tent flaps, and somewhere behind you, a camel groans like You're about to step into the life of a man who becomes one of the richest humans in history, though you might not guess that now, watching traders half asleep around flickering campfires and children kicking up dust in a sleepy village square. Welcome to the Empire of Mali sometime in the late 1200s. It's quiet now. But the gold, the journeys, and the strange political promotions are on there. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You're not famous yet. You're just you, a local noble kid in the court of Mali. You've got some nice robes, a decent seat at family feasts, and let's be honest, you're still trying to remember the names of all your half-siblings. The court is busy, full of whispered politics and clinking ornaments. Somewhere near the edge of the royal compound, musicians test rhythms on battered drums while your cousins squabble over whose donkey is faster. The capital isn't Timbuktu yet. It's Niani, tucked into a bend of the Niger River. The architecture is practical, sun-dried mud walls, flat roofs and market stalls that overflow with gourds, dyed cotton, and spices you can't pronounce yet. It smells like sweat, incense, and ground millet. But here's the thing, you're living in the most powerful empire in West Africa, and you barely know it. Mali stretches like a lazy river across the Sahel, vast and golden, held together by trade routes that run on camel hooves and stubborn optimism. Your people deal in salt from the Sahara, ivory from the forests, and gold from deep inside the earth. Oh, and cola nuts. Those things are like caffeine-flavored hugs. You've been told the land is blessed, that Mali's rivers are sacred veins of life, and the gold that glitters in the soil is a divine gift. Historians still argue whether the people of Mali viewed gold as a spiritual symbol or just something handy for buying more goats. Either way, there's a lot of it, and it's everywhere. Sometimes you even trip over tea. Now you've got older brothers, many of them. Some ambitious, some lazy, some just really into poetry. You're not first in line for anything, really, and most of your time is spent studying Arabic script, listening to elders drone on about duty and trying to avoid being assigned camel washing duty when at night you lie under the stars because there's no light pollution in the 13th century. The constellations are clear, the crickets are loud, and someone's probably snoring on the other side of the courtyard. Your mind drifts. You imagine being important, not su impori. Then one day news spreads like a warm breeze through the palace. The current Sultan Abubakari II has developed a strange obsession with the ocean. He's become fixated on the idea that there's something across the Atlantic, and no one's entirely sure why. Some say he had a dream. Others say a foreign sailor told him tales of lands beyond the horizon. One version of the story involves a talking fish, but let's not get into that right now. He gathers ships, big ones, full of men, food, gold, and something labeled experimental coconuts. You and the rest of the royal family watch from the riverbank as he sails away. And then nothing, no letters, no rumors, no vague postcards with seashells glued to them. Just silence. Weeks turn into months, then years. Eventually, the royal advisors shuffle uncomfortably and begin asking, "So, who's next?" You, dear listener, are suddenly on a short list. Why you? Some say it's because your older brother refused. Others whisper that the palace astrologer picked your name from a dream. Historians still debate how exactly you were chosen. But one dusty morning you find yourself standing in front of a circle of elders, adjusting your sash, trying not to sweat through your best tunic. You bow, they nod, and just like that you're Sultan Musa. You probably won't survive this, but you are now in charge of one of the largest empires in the world, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the heart of the Sahara. No pressure. Just, try not to crash the economy, annoy the desert spirits, or fall off a camel in public. Your name will eventually be remembered as Mansa Musa, Mansa meaning king or emperor. And while you're still adjusting to how heavy the crown feels, both figuratively and literally it's made of actual gold, plans are already in motion. You've got advisors, some wise, some whispery. One who insists the stars are angry with your haircut. You try to keep your expressions polite as you listen to them all. Deep inside, you wonder what kind of ruler will you be. How do you lead people across savannas and forests and desert sands? And how often is too often to ask if you can go lie down? One thing is clear, gold is going to be a recurring theme. You can feel it. In the minds of Bambuk, in the scales of the traders, in the way visitors from far lands squint just a bit when they hear your empire's name. But for now, it's still early. The sun rises, drums sound in the palace square. And somewhere in the distance, a caravan of merchants creaks into the city, their camels swaying gently like boats on sand. You adjust your robe and take your first steps into legend, and also into a fairly complicated tax situation. You don't wake up feeling royal. Not at first. Your robe itches in the usual way, your sandals still have that squeaky spot from overuse, and the guy delivering your breakfast millet forgets the honey again. But there's a new stillness in the air, a hush that follows you through the palace corridors. People bow lower now, they don't laugh quite as hard at your jokes. One of your cousins even calls you your radiance, and it takes everything not to smirk. Being king, you're starting to realize, is less about thunderous declarations and more about long meetings, sand in inconvenient places, and trying not to trip over ceremonial rugs. You weren't born first, or loudest, or with the sharpest sword, but you were born observant. And as you sit in the great hall of Niani under a ceiling painted with constellations and date palms, you remember every lesson whispered to you in childhood about justice, patience, and never trusting anyone who compliments your camel without making eye contact. Your siblings are still around, of course. Some have slinked away into quiet exile. Others have adopted suspiciously generous attitudes. One who once gave you a black eye over a shared mango now insists he's always seen greatness in you. You give him a ceremonial title that means royal counter of goats and move on. Still, this palace is different now. The air smells like fresh paint and mild unease. You ask for reports from your governors, who controls what towns, what crops are plentiful, what roads need rebuilding. You're trying to get the full picture of Mali's empire, from the forest kingdoms in the south to the Tuareg-haunted sands in the north. Historians still argue how accurate these reports would have been. Some claim Mansa Musa maintained a sophisticated bureaucratic network. Others say it was a mix of oral tradition, local informants, and guys who guessed really confidently. Either way, you're working with what you've got: lists, maps, rumors, and a young advisor who keeps drawing tiny dragons in the margins. But the challenges aren't just numbers. You inherit a court that's a mosaic of beliefs, customs, and personalities. Mali is Muslim officially, but not everyone interprets that the same way. Some fast during Ramadan. Others mix Islamic prayer with old forest rituals involving kola nuts feathers and the occasional chicken with attitude. Your job: keep the peace, keep the trade moving, and most of all, keep the gold flowing. Ah yes, the gold. Mali's gold mines are legendary. The ground here practically glitters. You remember the first time you visited one, a deep pit carved into red earth lined with sweating workers and guarded by armed men with spears and matching scowls. The noise was overwhelming. Pickaxes shouted orders, the occasional donkey that clearly didn't sign up for this. It's said that the Empire of Mali controlled over half the world's known gold supply at the time. Historians still debate the exact percentage, but they all agree on one thing: if gold were raindrops, Mali was a thunderstorm. You know that wealth can bring glory or trouble, so you do what any sensible ruler would: you start organizing. You regulate gold dust to prevent inflation. You standardize trade weights to stop sneaky merchants from skimming. You reinforce the salt caravans, those long, shimmering chains of camels that cross the desert from Tagaza to Timbuktu, loaded with bricks of salt stacked like dusty grey loaves of bread. And you sit down with the merchant guilds. Oh, the merchants! They arrive in long robes and longer stories. Some come from Ghana, others from beyond the Niger River. They all have opinions. One wants lower taxes on cola nuts. Another suggests a new spice route. One especially bold trader proposes naming a new marketplace after himself. You smile, nod thoughtfully, and instead name it after your favorite war horse.
But it's not just trade and infrastructure. You begin to think bigger.
What is Mali to the world? So far, not much. To Europeans, it's a vague rumor of riches. To your North African neighbors, it's a distant ally with questionable postal service. You want more. You want Mali to be known as wise, powerful, and why not mildly intimidating? This is where your scholars come in. You call together Islamic jurists, poets, and architects. One scholar tells you that education is the light of the soul. Another offers you a poem that mostly rhymes camel with scramble. You accept both graciously. Together you discuss laws, real laws, not just what Uncle Saidu thinks is fair. You work on building consistent systems of justice. You ask for translations of religious texts, for medical scrolls from Egypt, and maps from far-off Andalusia. And you do all this while also attending royal festivals, where people sing your praises in griot chants and balance small drums on their heads while dancing. There's roasted goat sweet dates and something called desert pudding that nobody can explain but everyone loves. In the evenings you walk the palace gardens. The sun sets over the river like a burning coin sliding beneath the earth. Somewhere a flute plays. You consider quietly that this life is both heavier and more precious than you imagined. But then there's one moment, just one, that shifts everything. A visitor from Cairo hands you a weathered book. You open it and see a map of the Islamic world. Mecca is there, drawn in beautiful calligraphy. Cairo gleams like a star, but Mali is missing. You close the book slowly. You're not angry, but something deep within you whispers, "Fix this." You won't raise armies, not yet. You won't send threats. You'll do something better. You'll go to Mecca yourself, in style, in faith, in gold. And you'll make sure the world never forgets the name Mansa Musa again.
You're not the first Muslim king to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, but let's be honest, none of them are going to do it quite like you. You're not just making a spiritual journey, you're making a statement, a shimmering, sandal-sinking in gold kind of statement.
The idea of the Hajj has been stirring inside you for months. As a devout Muslim, it's both an obligation and an aspiration. But you also understand image pageantry and how tales travel faster than caravans. You want scholars in Cairo to whisper about your generosity. You want the markets of Jerusalem to be buzzing with rumors of a West African sultan whose camels sweat gold. You want the cartographers of Baghdad to finally notice Mali, so you begin to plan.
And oh, what a plan.
Historians still debate the actual number of people who joined you. Some say 10,000, some say $60,000. There's one particularly enthusiastic storyteller who claims your procession was so long it accidentally looped itself. But let's work with the more plausible number 60. There were men. Among them, thousands of soldiers, merchants, slaves, scribes, And of course a small army of cooks, because you don't get to be the richest man in the world and settle for lukewarm dates and stale flatbread. You bring 100 camel loads of gold. Each camel carries 300 pounds. Yes, pounds. That's over 30,000 pounds of gold. Not coins, dust, nuggets, hand-carved bars with little swirls on the corners. Basically enough to mess with an entire region's economy, which you will, spectacularly. And don't forget your personal entourage, 500 attendants in embroidered robes, each holding a gold staff. There are musicians, griots, griot assistants, and several very confused ostriches someone decided would be good PR. You ask someone to draft an official route. They hand you a papyrus that simply says, "Head northeast. Try not to die." So you depart. It's 1324. You leave Niani with fanfare. Drums echo through the hills, the air smells of shea oil and excitement, and the camels are deeply concerned. You head eastward, winding through the savannas of Mali toward the Saharan edge. First major stop, Walata, a town of stone buildings, bustling trade and dust so fine it sneaks into your sandals like it has a personal grudge. You pass through with gifts, blessings, and extra gold for the mosque fund. The townspeople stare in wide-eyed silence as your caravan snakes past. One small boy waves, you wave back. That kid will tell that story until he's 93.
Then comes the real test, the Sahara.
Crossing the desert is not a whimsical stroll. It is dry, brutal, and existential. You march through shimmering heat where the horizon dances like a mirage, and camels sneeze dust. The wind has teeth. The sun doesn't care about your royal titles. You drink carefully from water skins, sleep in tents that flap like nervous birds, and listen to night winds that whisper old secrets. Still your procession presses on, one step at a time. The desert swallows footsteps, the stars look closer than the horizon, and you, Mansa Musa, keep moving because Mecca is calling.
You make it through. Barely.
But you arrive in Cairo, blinking against its chaos and glory. The streets are filled with calls to prayer, fruit vendors, acrobats, and cats that definitely own the place. You step onto Egyptian soil with a quiet, deliberate grace. And then you tip an entire economy.
How? By giving?
You give gold to the poor. You give it to merchants, mosques, street performers, even that one guy who offered you a papaya and a questionable dance. Your generosity is legendary. It's also economically catastrophic. Historians still argue about the exact effect, but gold prices in Egypt reportedly plummet for years. You've accidentally caused inflation by being too nice. One Egyptian scholar writes half admiringly that your wealth overshadowed the imagination. Another says he saw a camel sneeze out a gold coin, unverified but delightful. But Cairo is also a lesson. You meet scholars fluent in Arabic, Greek, and Persian. You tour libraries where ancient texts are copied by candlelight. You study architecture that makes your own palace look like a very ambitious mud hut. You're inspired, and you take notes. When you finally continue to Mecca, the road winds through mountains and sacred plains. You pray at the Kaaba with thousands of pilgrims. You bow alongside kings and paupers. You feel the weight of your faith pressed gently into your skin by sun and silence. It humbles you, even you. On your return, you slow the pace. You visit Jerusalem. You pass through Damascus, leaving more gifts. You hire poets. You trade gold for books. You ask questions that make philosophers pause. You even commission architects to return with you to Mali to build mosques, schools, and cities that shine like polished copper under the Sahel's sun. By the time you return home, news of your journey has already outrun you. Stories bloom like baobab trees in the minds of those who hear them. The man with the golden pilgrimage, the king who broke Cairo, the ruler from the edge of the world who prayed at Mecca and made markets tremble.
You're no longer just a sultan.
You're a legend. You return to Mali not on tired feet, but with thunder in your stride. The air smells different now, like the first rain after dry season, or maybe just like camels who've been on the road too long. The people cheer your arrival. Griots line the roads with drums and improvised rhymes, and somewhere a woman throws dates from a basket with confusing enthusiasm.
But your eyes aren't on the crowd, they're on the horizon.
Because while the gold glinted and the prayers echoed, and you basked in the warm, strange hospitality of Cairo and Mecca, and beyond you were also scheming, softly, sleepily, with the kind of ambition that doesn't shout, but whispers at maps in candlelight.
Mali must change, and it must change with stone.
You commission builders from Cairo and Andalusia, architects who sketch domes in the sand with sticks and argue about minaret placement while sipping honeyed tea. You want mosques, real mosques. You want learning centres, libraries, cities that hold their own under the scrutiny of any visiting scholar or overly judgy merchant from Fez.
Enter Timbuktu.
It's not much to look at yet. A trading town nestled near the Niger River, surrounded by flat lands and wind-chiseled rocks. But you see potential. It's already a junction of trade where desert caravans meet river traffic and where Tuareg merchants mumble about salt prices between mouthfuls of spiced millet. You decide this will be your crown jewel of knowledge. You fund the Jingwareba Mosque designed by Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, your imported architect, with excellent robes and terrible sandals. Built with mud brick and timbers, it rises from the earth like a sun-baked mirage. Inside, students sit on woven mats hunched over tablets of wood and bone tracing verses with charcoal and patience. Historians still debate how much of the mosque al-Sahili actually designed. Some say he just provided blueprints and a slightly smug attitude. Others claim he personally oversaw each wall. Either way, the structure remains an earthen echo of devotion and learning.
And it's not just one mosque.
Soon, Timbuktu boasts dozens of schools, copyist workshops and shelves groaning with parchment texts, some in Arabic, others in Songhai or Fulani. Subjects, everything from theology to astronomy, from medicine to debate etiquette. One particularly dense volume appears to be entirely about camel digestion, important stuff. Word spreads. Scholars arrive. Some from distant Morocco, others from deeper West Africa. They come hungry for knowledge, for patronage, for that famous sour tamarind drink the locals swear by. You welcome them all. You pay their stipends. You nod gravely at their long-winded theories about lunar tides and inherited memory. But your vision doesn't stop at Timbuktu. Gao, older, more rugged, sits further downriver. You invest there too. Mosques, warehouses, tax collectors with suspiciously neat handwriting. Zhao becomes a sister city of trade and administration. If Timbuktu is your university town, Gao is your business hub. Back home in Niani, your court reflects this new energy. You summon scholars to debate legal reform. You listen to judges argue cases of stolen chickens with the seriousness of a state funeral. You push for a fusion of Islamic law and traditional Mande customs, something both divine and grounded in millet farming logic.
And the paperwork.
Decrees, trade agreements, building codes, marriage licenses, camel inspection forms. Your scribes grow calluses. One develops a permanent ink stain on his ear. You offer him a palace title, Ink Warden of the Western Cabinet. He cries.
Still, it's not all scrolls and sand.
You find time for royal outings, slow walks by the river where hippos yawn like overworked tax officials. You visit your mines again, noting the improvements in safety and organization. You host poetry contests where the prize is a basket of cola nuts and polite applause. One poem compares your voice to butter over hot millet. You laugh. You frame it.
But beneath the calm you're watching.
You see how gold moves, how salt moves, how people move.
And you start reshaping the roads themselves.
Caravanserais resting stations pop up along key routes where travelers can find water shelter and the occasional bored storyteller offering unsolicited epics. Your roads become arteries, pumping not just goods, but gossip, religion, science, song. In this you begin to understand power, not as a crown, but as a current, a flow. Control the flow, guide it gently, and the empire stays alive. Strangle it with greed or fear, and the whole thing cracks like a dry calabash. So you invest in continuity, in patience. But power attracts attention. And while you're building universities and reorganizing tax codes, other eyes are watching. Some friendly, some envious, some just confused by the sheer volume of gold your camels seem to sweat. You begin receiving letters. Envoys from the Mamluks, from Andalusia. Even a feeler from Venice written in flowery Latin and containing 3 spelling errors of your name. You keep them all. One of your scribes makes a game of it most absurd diplomatic compliment of the month.
Still it's working.
Your empire breathes deeper. Trade flourishes. Learning spreads. Mali is no longer a rumor. It's a name whispered in Cairo's libraries, mapped in Baghdad's halls, sung in Andalusian courts. Yes, you have changed the perception of an entire corner of the world.
And you've done it with books, bricks, and just a bit of gold-flavoured showmanship.
Not bad for a guy who used to share a mango with his squabbling cousin. The years glide by like a slow, wide river, and you, Mansa Musa, float atop them, not idly, but with eyes always half open, listening to currents few others hear. The empire is breathing, yes, but no breath stays steady forever. You know this, which is why you turn your focus now to something far more delicate than gold or bricks, people.
Specifically succession.
Because ruling is one thing. Ensuring your vision survives you, that's the real long game. You've seen it go badly. You've heard the stories, kingdoms collapsing, not from invasion, but from cousins with ambitions and extremely sharp knives. So you begin laying the groundwork for what historians still debate was either a masterclass in dynastic planning or a slow-motion family squabble disguised as diplomacy. First, you elevate your son Maga to co-regent. You keep him close, let him sit in on court meetings, nod at treaties, politely yawn through long-winded tax reports. You want him to learn the rhythms, the tiny diplomatic frowns, the way a single, misused proverb can turn a tribal alliance frosty. But you don't stop with him. You send other sons, of which you have many thanks to royal tradition, and a deeply confusing household chart, off to govern regional territories. One gets Walata, another gets Gao, a third is sent somewhere so remote your map-maker quietly draws a shrugging stick figure. Historians still argue whether this decentralization was strategic brilliance or just you giving up on family dinners. Either way, it plants seeds. Seeds of loyalty, of competence, and yes, a few weeds of rivalry. You're not naive. You know power changes people. That the son who once brought you ginger tea with 2 sugars now eyes your throne like it's a particularly delicious roast yam. Still you prepare. You balance the court with loyal generals, wise judges, and a handful of griots who remember everything. And while you shape Mali's future, the outside world keeps creeping in.
Merchants bring rumours.
Of civil unrest in Cairo, of new sea routes whispered by Iberian sailors, of a Chinese fleet that supposedly sails with floating gardens on board, of kingdoms rising in the forests south of your border, mysterious city-states with walls of red clay, and kings who wear bird feathers as crowns. You listen. And then you decide, if the world is coming, you'd rather meet it on your terms. So you lean into diplomacy. You send envoys bearing gifts, textiles, manuscripts, slabs of gold the size of house cats. You dispatch scholars to conferences as far away as Tunis. You welcome foreign ambassadors to your court, offering them fermented milk and deeply confusing Mande riddles that require at least 4 metaphors and 1 local proverb about frogs. Some of them write back to their rulers with wonder. Others just ask politely where the restroom is. But you're not just playing host. You're collecting maps, stories, observations. You want to know what lies beyond the edge of the desert, beyond the curve of the coast. You begin quietly funding maritime experiments, riverboats made larger, sturdier, sleeker. You challenge your shipwrights. What if a vessel could ride waves the way your traders ride dunes? Here historians get twitchy. Some say you were inspired by tales of ships disappearing westward into the Atlantic. Others claim your brother Abu Bakr too was the real maritime dreamer. There's even a fringe theory involving a secret flotilla, a celestial map, and a cook who got lost and founded a sandwich shop in Brazil. What's certain is this: you begin to wonder what's out there. But you're also aging. Your steps slow, your beard grows silver at the edges. You nap more often under baobab trees, lulled by distant drums and the occasional shriek of a monkey with poor social skills. The empire remains strong, but you feel the weight of time in your bones. So you do what wise rulers do: you start giving things away.
Not gold, not yet.
But stories. You call for the griots. You sit with them by firelight, recounting your life not as a king, but as a man who once feared the desert, who marveled at Cairo's gardens, who once shared a tent with a scholar who snored like a goat with bronchitis. You leave nothing out. You laugh. You cry once when recalling your mother's voice. You describe the taste of your first pilgrimage date, the sound of rain on your gold-laden tents, the face of the young imam who taught you to read Quranic verses backward for practice, not sorcery.
And the griots remember.
They always do. Because for all your wealth, all your titles, all your great architectural legacies, you know stories last longest. They travel lighter than gold, burn slower than scrolls, and once whispered, they never fully vanish. So you become a whisper. Not yet, but soon. For now you rise from the fire. You stretch your limbs. You sip warm, spicy milk. You smile at the stars and think, not for the first time, that they look suspiciously like grains of sand. So here you are, Mansa Musa, older, slower, but somehow more awake than ever. You still rise before the heat settles in, when the morning sky is that gentle blue-grey like ash smeared across water. You sit on your carved wooden throne, wrapped in soft cloth that smells faintly of cedar and crushed leaves. The servants keep their steps light, the scribes keep their ink ready, and the griots. They're always listening, half in reverence, half in anticipation of a good punchline.
You don't speak as much now, but when you do, everyone listens.
It's the silences they've come to trust. Your court still buzzes petitions, disputes, visiting scholars, nervous trade envoys wondering whether they should bow, kneel, or just slowly back away. You receive them all, one at a time. Carefully, like you're tending a garden you planted long ago, and finally see blooming. But even gardens have weeds. There are whispers in the borderlands, tensions between smaller chiefdoms, old rivalries resurfacing in new clothes, this time dressed in trade tariffs and shipping disputes. You lean on your counsel now more than ever. You've spent years cultivating a group of advisors who are equal parts patient and paranoid. One of them speaks in nothing but proverbs, another chews on sugarcane constantly and answers every question with a question.
You like him.
Still the burden of empire, your empire feels heavier than gold now, which is ironic considering how much of it still glitters in your treasury.
Ah, yes, the gold.
The world can't stop talking about it. European cartographers now draw you on maps as a robed king holding a nugget the size of a melon, grinning like you've just bought Europe and are deciding where to build the pool. The Catalan Atlas, drawn in distant Majorca, labels your kingdom Mali with golden letters. It depicts you sitting expression serene atop a throne in the middle of West Africa, gold in hand, crown like a miniature sun.
You've become an icon, but you've also become a curiosity.
Foreign powers, many of whom couldn't place your empire on a map a decade ago, now send scouts, traders, even a few cloaked spies pretending to be merchants with extremely poor haggling skills. They want to know where the gold comes from, how deep your mines go, whether you really paved streets with bullion or if that was just a Cairo exaggeration.
You let them wonder.
In truth, the gold continues to flow, but not endlessly. You've taken steps to slow the mining to protect the veins. You understand, even if others don't, that wealth doesn't just come from the earth. It comes from rhythm, from trade routes and human trust, from systems, institutions. That's what you've built. Still people talk, and talking becomes myth. You begin to notice something odd, your own life retold back to you with embellishments you never authorized. Tales of you turning desert sand into coins with a glance, of you praying so hard in Mecca that a date tree sprouted on the spot, of camels crying tears of joy when you pet them, flattering sure.
But also strange.
You're still here alive, yet already halfway into legend. Historians still argue whether you encouraged these myths or merely failed to stop them. Did you in fact slip the occasional exaggeration into the griot's stories for dramatic effect? Or did you sigh, sip your tea and let the storytellers do what they do best, dramatize the unremarkable? In any case, your name spreads.
It becomes a symbol, not just of gold, but of possibility.
Across the Sahara, children play games pretending to be Mansa Musa, some on thrones of woven mats, others in alleyways traced in red clay. Traders swear by your name for good fortune. In distant cities, people refer to their own leaders as a Mansa Musa type, someone wise, generous, and maybe just a little dramatic. You're fine with that. At night in your quarters, you rest on cushions embroidered with geometric symbols. A cool jug of tamarind water sits nearby. And always nearby the wind rustles through papyrus scrolls left open by sleepy scribes. You read sometimes, slowly, with interest, with that same curiosity that once drove you through deserts and cities alike. Sometimes you find texts that quote your own words.
And you blink, because you don't remember saying them quite like that.
But it's fine. That's what memory does. It softens, polishes, turns footsteps into echoes. And besides, you're not quite done yet. You've begun thinking about your legacy more deliberately. Not just who succeeds you, but how you'll be remembered. Will they think of you as the builder, the pilgrim, the gold slinger of legends, or the quiet thinker who sat by the river watching fishermen mend nets while muttering something about the weight of water? You don't get to choose, not entirely, but you can leave breadcrumbs. You start penning instructions for a massive public granary system, a network of stored grain to protect Mali's people from future droughts. You commission translations of texts into local languages. You ask that certain stories, the real ones, not the ones with flying camels, be preserved in multiple dialects. And you speak more often to the griots now. You tell them not just what happened, but how it felt. What Mecca smelled like. The way Cairo's call to prayer made your spine hum. The tremble in your chest when you first saw your son sit the throne in your absence and knew the world wouldn't end. The griots nod.
They commit every word to memory, and so your story becomes something else, but not just history, not quite myth.
Something softer, truer, meant not to dazzle but to linger, like embers, like the hush before a story begins.
Time is getting slipperier now.
You Mansa Musa feel it each time you bend to tie your sandals and hear a small, treacherous pop from your knees. You laugh about it. The court laughs too nervously, but everyone sees it. Your walk is slower, your silence is longer, and the once unshakable certainty in your stride is mellowing into something gentler. Something like patience. Still, you are far from done. You spend your mornings in the palace garden where the baobabs provide ample shade and the birds tell jokes at your expense. You have named several of them after difficult advisors. One bird in particular, a shrieky red thing, has an uncanny knack for imitating your annoyed sighs. Naturally, it's named after your tax minister. You sip ginger water and watch the city of Niani hum beneath your feet.
And you begin to dream again.
Not of deserts or cities or gold-laden caravans, but of knowledge, wisdom. The kind that grows slowly like roots, reaching deeper than the glitter of coins. And so you turn your attention to the scholars. The empire already boasts universities, most famously in Timbuktu, where the Sankor complex sits like a hive of quiet brilliance. But you want more. You want Mali to be known, not just for what it possesses, but for what it knows. And so begins your quiet campaign of scholarly seduction. You dispatch envoys to Cairo, Fez, Tunis, offering generous endowments to any scholar who agrees to make Mali their new home. You sweeten the deal with housing stipends, and of course the odd nugget of gold discreetly tucked inside a goatskin pouch. They come.
Oh, they come.
Some ride for months across deserts, wrapped in dusty robes and muttering their way through sandstorms. Others arrive by boat, disoriented but delighted. They carry books, ideas, questions, and so the conversations begin. You host them in your courtyard beneath draped fabrics and whispering fans. You listen. Sometimes you ask sly questions, other times you argue gently with the kind of curiosity that doesn't demand to win. One scholar insists the earth is perfectly spherical. Another draws a diagram on a banana leaf to argue it's more like a saddle. A third interrupts to say it's irrelevant because truth is unknowable and mangoes are in season. You enjoy this? You're too old now for long journeys, but these discussions feel like travel, and they feed a new obsession: preservation. You worry that knowledge like gold can be squandered, that texts crumble, scrolls burn, and memory, despite its best efforts, sometimes forgets to pack an umbrella. So you invest in scribes, dozens of them, hundreds. Some copy text from Arabic into Mande languages. Others translate legal codes, medical treatises, and strange astrological diagrams that claim to predict goat moods based on moonlight. Historians still argue whether you truly understood all the texts you collected, or if you simply enjoyed owning a library that made people gasp. Either way, you were proud. You commission special rooms in Timbuktu, cool, dry, well-ventilated, to house the most fragile manuscripts. You issue an imperial decree that all important oral histories be recorded in parallel, spoken and written. Some griots resist, claiming the page lacks rhythm. You gently bribe them with honey cakes and flattery. It works. And soon you've created something extraordinary, a learning ecosystem that stretches across the empire. Young students in Gao study the same texts as elders in Jenne. Debates break out not with swords but with citations. Scholars begin referencing one another by name like old friends or mild nemeses. You've created a cultural bloodstream, and it flows strong. But of course, not everyone is thrilled. Some of the nobility grumble. They worry that too many scholars spoil the court, that academics slow decisions, that gold is being spent on ink instead of fortifications. You smile politely and schedule more poetry nights. Still, you know their complaints have a point. The world outside is not still. To the north, new alliances are forming. To the west, Portuguese ships are rumoured to be sniffing along the Atlantic coast. To the south, kingdoms with names like Ife and Benin begin to trade bronze and mystery in equal measure. You don't fear these changes, but you feel them like tremors through the floorboards of your empire. So you prepare not with armies, but with stories. You sit the griots down again. This time you focus less on your own life and more on Mali itself, its founding legends, its past glories. You retell the story of Sundiata, the Lion Prince, the founder king, your great-uncle or cousin, depending on which family tree you believe. They're all very confusing. You tell the version with the magical blacksmith, the one with the flying arrow, the one where Sundiata's mother speaks only in riddles and carries salt in her hair. You remind your people that Mali is not just a place, it's a story with a heartbeat, and you feel it beating still. At night, you sit by a fire, your robes light your heart lighter still. One of your grandsons crawls into your lap and asks if it's true you once traded a single gold bar for a fish that turned out to be a frog. You smile and say, only partly. Then you lean back, the stars above, wheeling slowly like lazy dancers.
And you listen
To the empire breathing,
to the pages turning.
to the future still unread but waiting. You wake to soft drumming in the distance. Not ceremonial, more like the rhythm of a marketplace warming up for the day. You smile. Niani is alive and well. The empire somehow still holds together, like a woven mat that's been sat on by a dozen generations, but never quite frays. You stretch slowly, creaking like an old door, but refusing help. Today you've decided is for the maps. Now you've seen many, some drawn by local traders with rivers as thick as wrists and villages represented by triumphant goats. Others come from foreign visitors, like that Italian fellow who insisted Timbuktu was a myth, then fainted when he arrived and saw the libraries. There's that Spanish monk's map too, the one where everything south of the Sahara is just labelled, here, be very wealthy people. But your favourite maps, they're the ones drawn in sand by merchants with sharp fingernails and excellent memories. You watch them sketch trade routes with quick, practiced flicks naming obscure oases and forgotten watering holes with affectionate curses. These maps don't last. The wind eats them, but they're truer somehow. You sit with your cartographers today tracing routes old and new. Mali's trade network has grown like creeping vines, snaking west to the Atlantic coast, east toward the Red Sea, and south into the lush forests where salt is traded for cola nuts and stories. You ask questions. You always ask questions. Is the salt still good at Taghaza? Have the canoe routes reopened after the rainy season? Are the camel herders in Takeda still grumbling about the price of oats? The answers come with laughter and with news. There's talk of new alloys in the North Copper mixed with tin and something shiny they haven't named yet. There are rumours of a king beyond the jungle who wears leopard skins and commands bees, though that last part may be metaphorical. Historians still argue whether you personally designed parts of Mali's trade network or simply ensured it didn't fall apart, but either way, it endures. Largely because of your decision to standardize weights and measures across the empire.
Oh yes, that bit.
See before you a trader could buy a sack of millet in Gao, only to discover that a sack in Jenne meant something the size of a toddler. Prices varied, confusion reigned, and every negotiation ended with exaggerated size and much eyebrow-raising. So you fixed it. Quietly, carefully. You assigned regional overseers to ensure fair scales. You introduced copper rods of standard length and little balance weights shaped like fish. Your idea, people, like fish. It sounds boring, and frankly it was, but it worked. And it meant trust. And trust is what kept Mali's markets humming like bees. But trade, as you've come to know too well, is not just economics, it's diplomacy. And so in your twilight years, you've become a master of polite doublespeak. You send letters to distant rulers, some grand, some obscure. Your scribes write them on thick parchment with ink that smells faintly of cinnamon. You always begin with warm greetings, then inquire about health, family, and casually the stability of their coastal forts. They reply in kind, offering gifts, spices, silks, occasionally an animal that no one can quite identify. One particularly enthusiastic king once sent you what he claimed was a sacred lizard. It escaped immediately and has been living under the palace stairs ever since. The children feed it mango. You name it foreign policy. But not every contact is friendly. There are tensions now. Merchants tell you that Portuguese sailors have been seen bartering aggressively along the coast, their ships boasting loud colours and louder intentions. You send scouts, discreet ones, dressed as spice traders with sharp ears and soft sandals.
What they find is concerning, but not yet urgent. Still, you know what history does, it circles back.
And so you redouble your efforts inland. You make sure every local chief, every regional governor feels heard, respected, slightly spoiled. You host them for feasts where the rice is fluffy, the fish spicy, and the speeches long but tolerable. You make jokes, you laugh at theirs, even the ones about your beard going grey. They leave full and loyal, because that's the trick to empire, not force, not fear, but participation. Everyone needs to feel like they're in the story.
At night, you return to your maps.
One in particular catches your eye. It's new, drawn by a young traveller from the south with wild curls and a nervous smile. It shows river routes that bend like question marks, and at the edge, a single note scribbled in poetic, "Monday beyond this forest, the earth tastes of cinnamon." You smile. There's always more to explore. Even if not by you, you call for your grandson. The tall one with too many questions and not enough shoes. You hand him the map and say only, "When the dry season ends, go see if it's true." He grins and bows and runs out already planning. You watch him go, feeling both ancient and brand new. This is how empires last, not by hoarding power, but by passing on the wonder. The sun rises slower these days, or perhaps it's just you who notices more. You Mansa Musa are no longer the young king who once dared the desert, turning gold into stories. But your mind is still keen, and your empire still listens. Even as the rhythms of power begin to shift beneath your feet like sand in a high wind. Today you sit beneath a canopy of stretched indigo, a bowl of dates on your lap, and a string of carved prayer beads sliding between your fingers. You are not alone. A quiet council gathers around you, elders, advisors, scholars, and a few curious children too young to realize they probably shouldn't be there.
You're planning a legacy.
And as always, the trickiest part of legacies is the people. Your family is large. Your children, grandchildren, cousins, twice removed wives and former wives, all capable, all clever in their own way, and all deeply, deeply convinced they deserve something. Ideally, something shiny or powerful, or both. You smile through it. Because you know what they do, not empires fall fastest when heirs squabble. So you take your time, you observe, you test, you nudge. One son is brave but impulsive. Another is wise but prefers books to people. One niece has the tactical mind of a war general and the humor of a grumpy goat. You admire her secretly, but the laws favor male succession, and so options are weighed with care. Historians still argue whether you had a clear favorite or if you played everyone against each other like a master of desert chess. The truth, as usual, is dustier and more complicated. But succession isn't your only focus. You've begun codifying laws, nothing rigid, nothing harsh, just gentle scaffolding to guide Mali when you are no longer here to personally smooth over disputes with a joke and a basket of sweet tamarind. Some of these laws are practical, clear guidelines for tax distribution, inheritance, and regional autonomy. Others are surprisingly poetic, like the decree that all travelers, regardless of status, must be offered water and shade before being asked their purpose, or the one about griots being immune from punishment when performing satire, provided the jokes are reasonably clever. You're crafting not just rules, but values, a philosophy of governance soaked in hospitality and soft power.
And the people respond.
Across the empire, from the Niger River to the far reaches of the Sahel, the name Mansa Musa no longer just means gold or grandeur. It means calm, order, predictability, like the first breeze before the rainy season.
Still, nothing lasts forever. You feel it most clearly during festival season.
The drums are louder than ever, the dancers wilder, the music sharp enough to peel paint from a calabash. And yet you watch not from the center anymore, but from a shaded platform at the edge. There's comfort there, and distance.
Children tug at your robes and demand stories. You oblige.
You tell them about the time your camel refused to walk and had to be bribed with cooked yams. You describe the palace in Cairo, where one sultan had a bath big enough to drown in and a mirror taller than a man. You recall the scholar who tried to explain the shape of the soul using only vegetables. They laugh, you do too. But beneath the joy you see the change. You are no longer the story's protagonist, you're becoming the myth. This transition is quiet, gentle, like dusk arriving without ceremony. And so in private you begin to downsize. You spend less time in court and more among the scribes. You give away your more absurd gifts, the leopard skin throne too slippery, the golden umbrella far too heavy, the singing water clock creepy at night. You retreat not from power, but from noise. In the gardens of Niani you walk barefoot. The earth is warm, the path familiar. Mango trees lean just slightly toward the palace as if listening in. You speak less now. And when you do, your words land like seeds, small, plain, but full of intent. One evening, as the sun bleeds into the horizon like spilled hibiscus tea, you summon your eldest son.
You do not give him a speech, just a robe, one you wore the day you were crowned. It is too large for him and he stumbles slightly, but he straightens eventually. That's the point. He understands.
And with that your role shifts. You become the whisper in the council chamber, the name invoked before hard decisions, the figure on coins carved into amulets, sung about in market songs. Children invent games in your name. Mansa says they call it. You find this both adorable and mildly tyrannical.
Meanwhile, you remain, watching,
Guiding sometimes, mostly being a still point in a turning empire.
and yet you are not melancholy.
You are surprisingly content, because you have built something that doesn't need you to hover over it constantly, something that might outlast even the cleverest map, the most careful law, the shiniest gold coin. You have built memory, and in this season of soft decline that feels like enough. The mornings arrive more slowly now, as if the sun itself is taking your cue to be unhurried. You rise without urgency, wrap yourself in a robe that once shimmered like a sunrise, but now thankfully has dulled a little with age. Too much shine is tiring. Outside the palace murmurs fountains, burble sandals slap gently on worn stone, and somewhere nearby a court musician practices the same 3 notes on a kora over and over, as if repetition might finally unlock their secret. You don't mind. It's meditative. This is the chapter of your life where everything softens. And so naturally you begin to think more often about stories, not yours. You've had your fill of hearing about yourself, but the ones that have kept Mali alive long before your reign and will carry it forward long after. The griots become your constant companions. You invite them into your chambers, your courtyards, even into the garden where the bananas grow sideways for no good reason. They sit cross-legged with drums between their knees' eyes, bright with memory, and they remember everything. That time your cousin tried to impress a Moroccan diplomat by riding a zebra. They have that. The scholar who translated Greek philosophy using metaphors involving goats and millet. Yes, that too. The unfortunate dinner where a foreign guest mistook shea butter for a condiment and ate half a bowl of it legendary. But beyond these giggles lie deeper veins. The griots trace your lineage not just to noble fathers and wise mothers, but to spirits of the river, to hunters who could speak bird language, to ironworkers who whispered to fire. Your legacy is not just a list of deeds, it's a mythos now threaded into the loom of West African storytelling.
And you begin to worry just slightly.
Because myths are tricky. They elevate, yes, but they also obscure. Historians still argue whether your famed pilgrimage bankrupted Cairo, or whether that's just a legend fattened by jealous merchants and dramatic poets. One scholar even insists you brought giraffes. You did not. You tried. but the giraffes declined. So how do you guide your legacy? With a smile. You sponsor the transcription of oral histories into books, beautiful flowing texts on vellum written in elegant Arabic by candlelight. You make sure your name is recorded in several spellings just in case the scholars of the future are picky. You pay scribes extra to include your favorite jokes in the margins. You even authorize a few embellished stories yourself. Yes, that tale about the star falling over Niani the day you were born. Your idea. You thought it sounded nice. You're not above a little marketing. And all the while you encourage your griots to keep performing live. Because you understand something many rulers forget: written words may survive time, but spoken words survive people. And people are what matter. Still you feel time pressing in. You grow more reflective. You find yourself lingering at old thresholds, doorways you passed 1,000 times without noticing the pattern in the wood, the mark where someone once rested a clay pot. You pause beneath familiar trees and listen for changes in their rustle. Do they sound different now, or is it you who hears differently? Your appetite shifts. Not just for food, though yes, your legendary sweet tooth now prefers roasted plantains over candied hibiscus, but for company, you keep a tighter circle. You'd rather speak deeply with one scholar than shout wisdom across a crowded court. You invite an old friend, a trader, who once rode beside you during your Hajj back to visit. The man is mostly knees now and complains constantly about his joints, but he remembers the same stories you do. Together you laugh until your stomach hurts. He brings dates stuffed with almonds. You bring silence. It's enough. And still the empire hums. Merchants move safely along well-kept roads. The libraries of Timbuktu grow fatter. Gold continues to be weighed in careful bowls and shaped into rings that now bear your crest. Children born long after your pilgrimage still chant your name like a lullaby. But even you can't avoid the occasional moment of worry. What if it doesn't last? What if the harmony is thinner than it looks? You voice this one evening to your council. They listen, thoughtful, respectful. Then one young advisor, barely out of his teens and still smelling faintly of ink and overconfidence, says softly, "Your Majesty, even if it doesn't last forever, it lasted longer than anyone thought it could." You nod.
'Cause he's right.
Your empire may not be eternal, but it has become an era, a golden hinge between past and future, a lullaby made of coin, law, story, and dust.
And in the quiet that follows, you find yourself at peace.
You close your eyes and listen, not for danger or unrest, but for the faint notes of a griot's melody rising through the warm evening air. The same song that will one day be sung in places you'll never see by voices you'll never know.
But the melody will be yours.
You wake slowly now. Not because of age, though your joints do creak like an old dhow on a breezy river morning, but because you no longer need to hurry. You have earned this slow return to waking like a lion who knows the savannah will still be there when it stretches. Today, like most days lately, begins with the scent of incense sandalwood and tamarind husks curling upward in sleepy spirals. Your servants know not to rush you. Instead, they bring warm water, honeyed porridge, and news wrapped in gentle tones. The world still turns and Mali still hums along its axis. But lately you've been preoccupied with something less worldly.
The stars.
Not the vague romantic sort that poets coo about, but the real ones tracked and charted by the astronomers of Timbuktu, with lines of geometry so delicate they could be mistaken for spider silk. You've funded them for years, yes, but now you sit with them more often. You listen, you wonder. They show you star maps drawn with charcoal and ochre little pinholes in parchment revealing entire celestial highways. Some scholars insist that certain constellations align perfectly with the founding of your dynasty. Others are convinced they portend the end. Historians still argue whether your interest in astronomy reflected your spiritual curiosity or a more personal kingly obsession with legacy. Probably both. One particularly excitable scholar suggests over a dinner of Tusalti stew that you might one day be placed among the stars. As a constellation? You ask, amused.
No, he says, eyes wide as a myth.
You already are, but you don't tell him that. Instead, you ask them questions. Some practical. What season brings the strongest winds to Walata? Some whimsical. Is there a star that moves as slowly as a tired camel? And one just once that you whisper so softly, only the silence hears.
What comes after all this?
You don't expect an answer. That's not the point. Your curiosity, after all, has never demanded solutions, just stories. And the universe is full of stories. In the evenings, you walk your garden path, stargazing in your own quiet way. The air smells of baobab blossoms and crushed mint. A white cat sometimes follows you, padding silently beside your sandals like a guardian who refuses to admit it's emotionally invested.
And here in these peaceful wanderings, you start to think about your father.
He left no great records, no golden caravans, just you and a slightly cracked ring and a few maxims you still quote to your scribes when they get too proud. If you cannot rule your tongue, you cannot rule a village. That one's a favorite. It makes you wonder what your children will remember of you. The gold, certainly. The pilgrimage, undoubtedly. But you hope selfishly perhaps they remember the things less likely to survive in stone, like your deep belly laugh when someone brought you a camel wearing jewelry, or how you'd always ask the youngest servant to tell their version of a story before you listened to the griot's official one. You hope they remember that you listened. And so in your final years you begin a new project, something modest, something slow.
A school of memory.
It isn't flashy, no golden spires or marble domes, just a quiet building near the Niger, shaded by acacia trees filled with students learning to listen before they speak. You invite griots, astronomers, historians, and even cooks to teach, because food, after all, carries history better than most books. Try forgetting a stew your grandmother made. Exactly. One lesson involves peeling mangoes while reciting poetry. Another includes drawing your family tree and then flipping the paper over to write a new one based on chosen kin. You're especially fond of that one. And through it all, you sit quietly in the back, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes gently smiling when a student makes a mistake worth celebrating. You don't interfere, you don't correct, you just are.
And in being you teach.
You begin wearing simpler robes, you turn down gifts. You request smaller rooms and longer walks. Some courtiers whisper that the great Mansa Musa is fading. But those who know you best understand. You are not fading, you are distilling, becoming concentrated, potent in stillness. And while your body slows, your thoughts seem to expand. You reflect on trade routes, those golden lifelines of Mali. You remember the Berber merchants who drank tea so strong it could melt iron, the Tuareg guides who could read sand like you read ledgers, the caravan leaders who told you more in a sigh than some men could in an hour. You remember them all. And on one particularly cool evening, sitting on a worn bench by a lily pond, you turn to your scribe and say, "Write this down. A legacy is not what is remembered, it is what continues to nourish." He looks puzzled but obeys.
You smile.
Because someday, long after your bones have returned to the soil, someone will read those words and understand, not because they know you, but because they recognize themselves in what you left behind. A hush settles over the garden. Somewhere a heron glides low above the water, graceful and slow.
And you close your eyes, not in sleep, but in gratitude.
The stars begin their soft shimmer above.
And still you listen.
You spend more and more time near water now. Not because of thirst, it's the rainy season and every jug is full, but because it calms you. The slow, repetitive lapping of the Niger against its own muddy banks is the perfect sound for letting thoughts drift, like a lullaby played for your memories. Today you've chosen a shaded alcove in the palace gardens, a low platform covered in reed mats and soft cushions. Around you the air is warm but not stifling. A gentle breeze stirs the edges of your robe. Someone has left a bowl of sliced dates within reach. You make a mental note to promote them. Across from you sits a young poet, barely 20, eager-eyed and terribly nervous. He's been brought in to read you a new verse, an epic about your pilgrimage. He stammers a bit at first, which is understandable. You're a living legend after all. It's not easy to recite your version of history to the person who actually did it.
Still he finds his rhythm.
His voice swells, quivers, soars. The cadence of desert nights and golden cities comes alive between the syllables. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. But as he finishes with a flourish describing you naturally as the river of gold in human form, you open your eyes and gently raise a hand.
Lovely, you say, but rivers are full of crocodiles. Maybe something a bit less toothy.
He blushes. You chuckle. And then you do something he doesn't expect. You ask him about his story. At first, he's confused, but slowly words tumble out. His grandmother, who once carried letters between villages tucked inside papyrus scrolls. His uncle, who swears he saw a dragon by Lake Debo, a hippo probably, but you don't interrupt. The nights he spent listening to travelers in the market dreaming of faraway lands. You nod thoughtfully. That's a good story too, you say. Maybe next time tell that one. Because you've learned slowly, steadily that the best way to build a lasting empire is not with gold or swords or even perfect verse. It's with curiosity. A constant, stubborn belief that everyone has a piece of the truth and that those pieces matter. Still, the duties of rule persist. Today a delegation has arrived from the east. Scholars from Cairo and Mecca bearing gifts of books, rare spices, and one rather disgruntled owl who refuses to be gifted politely. You receive them with the usual mix of charm and dry wit. One scholar, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and an endless frown, asks if the stories about your pilgrimage are entirely accurate. Did you really give away so much gold that the Egyptian economy trembled? You pause, pretending to consider.
I may have been generous, you say, with a sly smile, but the economy was already a little jumpy. He doesn't laugh, but someone in the back does. That's enough.
After the formalities, you host a modest feast, grilled fish with lemon millet bread, still warm from the oven, and honeyed plantains crisped at the edges. As usual, you eat little and listen much. The scholars talk of trade winds, crumbling empires, and new theories about Aristotle that involve too many goats. You sip your drink and feel a quiet pride. Because even though you are growing smaller in the world's eye, your court has become larger. It stretches beyond borders, beyond lifetimes. Mali is not just a kingdom anymore. It's an idea, a story carried on the backs of traders, in the songs of poets, and through the quiet smiles of students learning to write for the first time. Later that night, in the cool hush after the visitors have gone, you visit the archives.
Not the public ones, the hidden ones.
A room deep beneath the palace carved into the stone. Here scrolls and manuscripts line the walls like soft whispers. Some are so old their ink has faded into a gentle sepia mist. Others are still being written. You add a new entry yourself. You sit at the low desk, take a fresh piece of vellum and begin to write not in royal decree or epic prose, but in the voice of someone remembering. It's a small story, a quiet one, about the first time you rode a horse and how you fell off so spectacularly that your nurse had to pretend she had tripped just to preserve your dignity.
No gold, no titles, just mud and laughter.
You leave the scroll unsigned. Because it doesn't matter who remembers it was you. What matters is that someone remembers at all. The room feels warmer when you leave it. The stars are out again, your old companions, steady, silent, as curious as you. And as you walk back toward your chambers, passing flickering lanterns and soft footfalls of servants preparing for bed, you feel that rarest of things for a ruler. Contentment. Not the kind born from conquest or control, but the quiet certainty that something has been well stewarded, that the land has been listened to, that the people have been seen, and that perhaps, just perhaps, your empire will outlast you, not because of how brightly it burned, but because of how deeply it was planted. There are rumors, of course. There always are, especially when a ruler begins to walk a little slower, speak a little softer, and spend long afternoons staring at clouds like they're ancient scrolls. You've heard the whispers in palace corridors behind market stalls, even drifting from the lips of camel drivers who think the desert winds will carry their words safely past your ears. Mansa Musa is preparing to leave. Some say he'll return to Mecca. Others claim he's found a hidden city. But the truth, as always, is both simpler and stranger.
You've been dreaming.
Not ordinary dreams either. These are vivid, shimmering things like stories wrapped in velvet. You ride on clouds shaped like crocodiles. You walk across deserts of glass. You meet versions of yourself, a child in rags, a king in gold, a man made entirely of wind. And in every dream, someone asks you a question. What haven't you given away yet? The first time you shrugged it off, just a dream, too much ginger in your tea maybe. But the question comes again and again.
What haven't you given away yet?
You begin to ask your scholars, not directly of course, you frame it as a philosophical riddle wrapped in an academic inquiry. They offer answers, your sword, your name, your grief. One poetic cook suggests with a wink your appetite.
He's not entirely wrong.
But none of the answers feel complete. Not until a very old woman visiting from a village you barely remember passing through as a young man says this.
Your silence.
And you feel it deep in your bones. Because for decades you have spoken, taught, ruled, advised, commanded, corrected, praised. You've filled scrolls and echoed in halls. But maybe, just maybe, there is a kind of gift in choosing not to speak.
Not in secrecy, not in avoidance, but in presence.
So you begin to experiment. During meetings, you say less, sometimes nothing. You nod, gesture, raise a brow. And something miraculous happens. People fill the silence with their own wisdom. One day, your youngest advisor suggests a new grain distribution model, bold, risky, but fair. You would have interrupted once. Now you just lean back and listen.
It works.
And you smile. Because letting go of your voice isn't losing power. It's transforming it.
Even your scribes take notice. One confesses nervously that your quiet days make his job harder. There's nothing to record, he says. You've gone all invisible.
You chuckle softly and reply, then write about the quiet. It's part of the story too.
And he does.
There's another change too. You begin revisiting old places, not dramatically with banners and elephants and fanfare, but quietly, with a small entourage and a steady camel. You return to Niani's outer neighborhoods where women still pound millet in rhythm and children dare each other to peek at your shadow. You smile and wave. You ask about the price of salt. You taste boiled yam dipped in dried fish sauce and declare it superior to anything served in your palace. It is frankly. You stop at an abandoned watchtower once manned by a cousin you barely remember. You climb its rickety stairs. At the top, the wind is strong and smells like rain. You close your eyes and let it buffet your face. It's the same view you had decades ago, but you are not the same man. A child's kite dances in the air below. You watch it until it dips out of sight. That night you write one last decree. It's not long, just a few lines. You name your successor one of your sons, yes, but chosen not by age or birthright, but by a lifetime of small decisions. He once halted a merchant from cheating a widow and then sent the man home with both shame and dinner. That told you all you needed to know. You leave instructions for the libraries, the schools, the roads. You thank your court. You remind them that stories are living things and must be fed gently. And then with the last line, you release your name.
I was Mansa Musa, you write, but names are like footprints in sand.
You sleep deeply that night.
In the morning you do something that no one expects.
You disappear.
Not in the royal sense, not a vanishing, not a kidnapping, not a political sleight of hand. You simply walk away.
Some say you took a canoe downstream, traveling until the river swallowed the stars. Others believe you returned to Mecca in disguise. A few believe you died quietly in your garden and your body was buried under an unmarked baobab tree. Historians still argue whether your final journey was literal or metaphorical, or if it ever happened at all. But among the griots there's another version. They say you became a story, a figure who visits travelers lost in the dunes, a man who appears in markets to buy honey with no money, a teacher who whispers riddles in dreams and disappears before dawn. They say if you listen closely at night, especially when the air is thick with the scent of hibiscus and the moon is full, you can still hear your laughter on the wind.
Low, warm, patient.
And very, very amused. The palace endures without you, of course. It always would have. That's the secret no one tells new rulers. Kingdoms are far more like gardens than ships. You don't steer them, you tend to them. And when you vanish from the garden, the sun still rises, the millet still grows, and the bees keep on buzzing like tiny bureaucrats with wings. Your son, the new Mansa, is quiet at first. He wears simple robes and prefers walking to riding. The court is mildly scandalized. One advisor even offers to lend him a more kingly voice, as if it were a hat one could borrow, but your son just smiles and keeps listening. Under his rule, Mali changes again. Slowly, patiently. New schools appear in villages that never had scribes before. Scholars are paid in fish as often as gold. The libraries start accepting oral histories dictated by elders with no formal writing. Some are told in proverbs, others in lullabies. One is delivered entirely in riddles and requires 3 translators and a very patient goat. People complain less, laugh more, sleep earlier.
But the whispers of you continue.
In Timbuktu, a trader swears he saw you disguised as a blind beggar correcting a merchant's arithmetic with a casual flick of your cane. In Walata, an old woman sells perfume made from desert lilies and insists the recipe was given to her by a very polite ghost. Even your former cook claims you visit him in dreams to critique his yam stew.
You always want more cumin, he says. Even in the afterlife, you're spicy.
But dreams are tricky things. Sometimes they're just dreams, sometimes they're history-wearing pajamas, and sometimes, rarely, there's something more. There's one such dream that begins to spread, a dream shared by traders, poets, bricklayers, and children. In it, you walk across a bridge made of folded maps, each step taking you to another version of Mali, the past, the future, the might-have-beens. You stop halfway and sit down. You pluck a star from the sky like a grape and offer it to the dreamer. Here you say, you'll need this.
No one knows what the star is for.
But they always wake up feeling steadier. In the archives, the stories about you multiply. Some are entirely invented tales of you calming sandstorms with a glare or negotiating peace between crocodiles and hippos unsuccessfully. Others are quietly true, like how you once waited 5 hours to hear a village girl sing, then built her a school when she forgot the words.
Historians try to sort fact from fable.
But Mali doesn't mind the blur, because to your people the line between memory and myth is thin as silk. What matters is that your story continues to be told, whispered by griots painted in sand woven into cloth, not because it's perfect, not even because it's true, but because it soothes. Your story now is a kind of lullaby, a gentle cadence of patience, generosity, and curiosity. Listened to at night just before sleep by children across the savannah and scholars beneath oil lamps. It begins with camels and gold, but ends in laughter and starlight. And in the end, what more could you want? One morning, decades later, a young librarian finds a scroll buried at the bottom of a sealed chest. The ink has faded, but the handwriting is unmistakably yours. It's not a decree or a lesson or even a poem. It's just a note. To whomever reads this, you are not too late. The journey is not finished. The map redraws itself with every kindness. Go gently and don't forget to bring snacks. The librarian reads it 3 times. She doesn't know who left it, but she copies the words and places them in the margins of other scrolls like a signature that forgot it was famous.
And this way you keep traveling.
Not in carriages or caravans, but in sentences. You move through memory like wind through grass, never still, never graspable, but always felt. And if one night a lonely traveller pauses beside a fire, stares up at the stars, and whispers your name without knowing why,
Well, you'll be listening.
time that patient sculptor continues its quiet work. The great cities of Mali shift and settle. Timbuktu thrives for a time, then slumbers its walls, breathing dust and poetry. The gold mines, once echoing with song and sweat, now lie still, visited, mostly, by curious goats, and the occasional brave geologist with poor shoes. But your memory, it doesn't fade, not really.
It ripples.
In ways both grand and hidden. There's a primary school in Senegal where children trace maps of ancient empires with crayons that always run out of yellow too soon. There's a calabash vendor in Burkina Faso who insists every sale must be made with a smile because that's how the King of Gold did it. In Brazil, a percussionist composes a lullaby called Mansa's Steps, filled with soft drumming and the sound of walking through sand. In Jakarta, a coffee shop paints your likeness, kind-eyed robe, slightly wrinkled on its bathroom door, labelled Patron Saint of Long Journeys. A little strange, but not untrue. Historians still argue about your final days. Whether you truly returned from your pilgrimage or died on the road. Whether the rumoured second Hajj happened at all. Whether the gold you gave away devalued Cairo's economy for a decade, or if that was just grumpy merchants being dramatic.
But no one argues this. You changed the shape of West Africa.
With generosity, with patience, with humour even, you taught the world that empires need not be built with swords alone, that a caravan can carry knowledge, that a ruler can be both mighty and merciful and still prefer cumin in his stew. Somewhere in the Sahara, a storyteller sits beside a fire. She is old now. Her voice is soft but steady. Children gather close, eyes wide. They've heard tales of dragons and giants, of gods and ghosts, but tonight they ask for the one about the man with gold in his hands and stars in his pockets. And she begins. She tells them of your childhood, how you once mistook a camel's shadow for a lion and ran screaming into a spice cart, of your pilgrimage when you gave away your sandals and walked barefoot through history, of your quiet years when your silence grew gardens in other people's minds. The children laugh, gasp and yawn. One falls asleep with a date half chewed in his mouth. The fire crackles.
Above the stars blink in quiet recognition.
The woman pauses. She looks out into the darkness and smiles. She's certain she hears something. Just for a moment, the rustle of a robe, the soft jingle of coins, and a chuckle deep as the riverbed. But when she turns, there's only wind. Still she says, "Good night, Musa," and lets the silence settle like a blanket.
And in that hush, your story continues.
Not as a lesson, not as a warning, but as comfort. Because long after the gold is spent and the scrolls are faded and the cities are quiet, there will still be nights like this, fires like this, listeners like this.
And your journey, it will still be going.
Now, it's quiet. The kind of quiet that settles behind your eyes and makes your breathing slower, your shoulders just a little softer. The caravan has long since passed. The city gates are closed. Somewhere, a night bird sings half a note before sleep takes even her.
You're lying beneath a sky that once mapped an empire. A sky Mansa Musa walked beneath. Look up and maybe you see the same stars he did, flickering little memories burning light years away, still trying to get your attention.
There's something reassuring about it, isn't there? That a story can drift across centuries, across sand and paper, and whispered bedtime recordings, and still land gently here. With you. Now, you've wandered with a king tonight, seen his robes trail dust across the savannah, heard his laughter echo off marble in Cairo, watched him disappear into legend, not with fanfare, but with kindness. Let your thoughts soften now. Let them wander through gold-laced deserts and humming markets, through palm groves and libraries full of unspoken dreams. Let them be slow. Let them be heavy like dusk on the river, because the journey's done. For now, there will be other stories, other soft roads, but tonight you've traveled far enough.
So breathe deeply
Sink a little deeper into your blankets. Let the night keep watch.
and sleep